and welcome to Talking Mental Health, a series from the Wellness Project where I interview mental health professionals on all things mental health and wellness. Today I'm here with Alina. Alina, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Alina Kodat. I'm a mental health therapist in Jacksonville, Florida, and I've been in private practice here for about 9, almost 10 years.
Yeah, I'm very excited for our topic today. The spirit of honesty, I told Alina before we even started that I didn't even know where to start with this topic because it's it's a topic I hadn't thought about before, new territory. So I'm very excited to have her here and to talk about this. So we'll be talking about dignity, mental health, and spirituality and how they all kind of intersect. So if you could for us, just give us like kind of a what is dignity? Because I feel like when I hear that word, I'm not even entirely sure myself of what my dignity is.
Yeah, it is a really big concept. And when we talked about that, I thought, man, that's so big. And, I've never had somebody come in for counseling saying, I don't believe I have dignity or my dignity is really struggling. That's not what people come in for. And yet, dignity is so often the thing that we are talking about in the therapy room. So I did a little like quick Google search because I don't even define dignity on a regular basis, and so I felt like let's see what the internet has to say. So it's basically just the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. So, and what is my worth? Am I worthy of honor and respect? And so that's big. Like we do, we do know what it's like to think about: Am I worthy of respect? Am I worthy of love? And so the what makes what helps us to answer this question, I mean, it is so tied to our, those existential beliefs about ourselves, and specifically spiritually. So I my own spiritual beliefs impact my view of dignity. So I believe that we're all created in the image of God, and God is perfect, God is holy, and I'm made in his image. That doesn't mean I'm holy and perfect, but I am made in his image. And so that dignity was given to me.
Mhm.
That's my spiritual kind of the underpinnings, or how I define dignity. And I believe that's for you. I believe that's for me. That's for everybody. God has made us all in his image. Um,
Mhm.
and as much as I love my dog wasn't made in his image. So I have dignity um, in a different way than other created things. So,
Mhm.
so that's kind of the biblical or spiritual basis that I start from. And as I was thinking about this, what kept coming to my mind is that I believe dignity is so rooted in our relationships.
Okay.
Um, Even if when we go back to this, my biblical view that because I'm created in the image of God, He has given me dignity. That's relational, right? That's based on my
Mhm.
relationship with the Lord, His relationship with me, right? He's that first mover in our relationship. So, and then there's more to that. There's more relational data that we have. I believe as a Christian that, you know, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and then that relationship was broken,
Mhm.
the Lord then began to create a way. He said, one day there will be a savior for this broken relationship, and that will be Christ. So not only did the Lord pursue us and make us in his image and give us dignity, but then when we sinned, he then created, you know, a way um, to restore dignity through his son. So that is the framework that I'm coming from, right?
Mhm.
Um, so it's kind of a big answer to your question, but I'll kind of stop it there for now. That's kind of how I would define dignity.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was great too, and all the crossing between different aspects of someone's life that's included within that, kind of definition of dignity, and it's super fascinating too because I hadn't when we talked previously, I kind of made that connection of like spirituality and dignity, but I hadn't gone back further to those roots of like the original sin.
Mhm.
So I think that was super interesting to kind of hear. I'm curious because we're kind of on this path right now of dignity and spirituality.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious if I can veer off a little bit and we can talk about spirituality and mental health. Because from kind of what I'm understanding, a lot of dignity is related to your spirituality. And so I'm curious how that also relates to our mental health.
Yeah. So, um, mental health in a uh, so in a broad sense, I would say they're very intricately linked.
Mhm.
Are so you're asking, are you asking about spirituality and dignity, or dignity, spirituality, and mental health? Just to clarify.
Kind of all three, but more specifically on that spirituality and mental health side, because we've done a lot of like the dignity and spirituality connections. So I'm kind of
Mhm.
curious on the other half.
So to answer your question, I want to go back to what I was saying about how dignity is so defined in relationship, or we understand our dignity and our worth and our value in relationship. And I've talked about how that happens um, from the Lord, um,
Hmm.
but we live with people, right? And
Yeah.
so living with the first caretakers that we have, our parents or maybe, grandparents or whoever it was, we get a lot of information about our value and our worth from relationships. And then moving into school, do our friends like this? When I speak, do they listen? What are kind of the experiences that I have with my friends, with my teachers, with people in my neighborhood, my church? All of that becomes information that we can internalize, that we can believe about ourselves.
Hmm.
And so our dignity is kind of something that can shift and change based on our experiences in relationship. So, as a therapist, I am a relational therapist. I believe that the relationship we have in the room is one that can also give them data about their dignity. Do I listen to them? Do I listen with curiosity and, um, you know, non-judgmental curiosity?
Hmm.
And I do, because I believe this person has a story and I want to hear it. And I want this relationship to be corrective. Maybe they weren't listened to. And so I know that my relationship in the room is, specifically speaking, I want to give them that message that they have dignity, that they are valuable, they are worth listening to and worthy of respect.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. And this is such a fascinating conversation to me because, again, I think I've said this already, but all the different aspects it relates to of a person and who we are. Um, I'm curious because we've talked a lot about what dignity is, how it relates to different parts of who we are, different aspects of mental health, spirituality. But I'm curious, what does it look like, or what causes someone to have a lack of dignity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I actually think ultimately it's not possible for someone to not have dignity,
Okay.
because they have been made in the image of God. So this is my perspective.
Hmm.
Um, but there's no one that doesn't have dignity. Now, their perception of their dignity, that's key, right? That's the
Hmm.
important part. If you perceive yourself to be unlovable, unworthy, not worthy of respect, um, all, we'll get into kind of core beliefs, but they rise out of your understanding, your perception of your own dignity, which again has happened in relationships. Um,
Hmm.
so what we believe affects our perception of our dignity. And so when somebody comes in for therapy, or this is in my relationships as well, I am listening to their story. I'm listening to their relational history. I'm listening to what are the events in their life that have shaped how they view themselves. Do they do they have an awareness of how they view themselves and their dignity? And sometimes they do. Sometimes in their that's the stuff that they can be consciously aware of. But sometimes it's through me asking questions and sitting and listening and giving feedback that we can both arrive at, this is how you view yourself. And so, um, story, what is their story? How has it been shaped? That impacts if they, how they view their dignity. Um, so I am a therapist that really believes in the importance of family systems. And so when somebody's coming in, I'm really listening to the role that they played in their family. A lot of
Mhm.
times I'll explain this as like, if you've ever seen a clock where the there's like a clear face, and so you can see all the gears. This is an analogy that I'll use with clients. I'll say, think about that clock, and every person in your family is a different gear, and it all works in tandem to keep the clock running. And everybody plays a role in this family. And so when someone comes in, I'm listening to what their role has been. And that is often information about how they view their own dignity, right?
Mhm.
So, dad was an alcoholic. Dad was the only one that could get drunk or be angry. Mom was, pretty quiet. I was a good kid. And I was loved when I was good, when I kept things calm. And so their work is tied to their dignity. If I'm not
Mhm.
good, I'm not as valuable. And so then, once we get to that point, understanding the family system, the roles they played, their value, then we can start to go, is that true?
Mhm.
Is that true? How is that not true? How can we, how can we, what is true, right?
Mhm.
And how can you live out of this new truth? And so this takes time, um, sessions to really listen and hear and understand. So, long story short, there is no such thing as somebody without dignity.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too because I mean, I've probably mentioned this 1,000 times, but as we're exploring this topic and I'm learning myself just from what you're saying, I hadn't put that together that like, we always have that dignity, but self-perception is a huge part of it. So no lack of dignity, but having like a more negative self-perception, I guess is kind of where you're like,
Mhm.
mhm, yeah. So, I mean, just to move forward then with that, I when, well, I'm in college again, but when I was in college for
Mhm.
my bachelor's, I I just noticed, like, such a negative self-perception of those around me. Like, the
Mhm.
constant, like, need to I don't look, the way I want to. I'm not moving forward in my career the way I want to. I'm not doing as well in my and so I'm curious, to relate this to college-age young adults, how do you see dignity or that, like, negative self-perception within college-age young adults?
Yeah. So I love counseling college age young adults because it is such a dynamic time in a student's life. A lot of times, I mean, so many things have changed. Maybe they're not living with their family anymore. Maybe they've moved away from home. Maybe they've moved away from the city or the state. Um, Maybe they are shopping in a new place and have new friends and new professors and a new schedule, and their bodies are still changing, and it's so much transition. It's a huge developmental stage of transition. And so I love to work with college students for this reason, because there's a lot of opportunity for self-examination, sometimes even for the first time. I find a
Mhm,
lot of times when you take people out of their home for the first time, they go, who am I? Why do I do what I do? Who were those people that I was raised with? Why do they do what they do? And is this how I want to live my life? Do I want to believe these things? Do I value these things? Is the God that they worship the one I want to worship? Um, do I believe he's even there? I mean, so it's all these things that people are starting to think through. And
Mhm.
so that there's a lot of opportunity there for reevaluating how you feel about things. There's also a lot of opportunity for even becoming aware of how you feel about things.
Mhm.
You did things because that's the way your parents did it. And all of a sudden you kind of can't do that. And this doesn't happen overnight, your first day on campus, but a lot of times it's you're brushing up against other students who they were raised in like basically a completely different culture. Every family has its own culture with its own rules and values and secrets, and how they treat secrets. And so as you bump up against people coming outside of their family culture with their view of themselves and the world, you begin to go, "Oh, this is who I am, and this is how I feel about things." Um, so I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some of the first thoughts that I come to my mind when I think about self-perception and dignity for college students.
Mhm.
There's also
Yeah,
the
mhm.
well, and there's also the idea of like, can I succeed on my own?
Yeah.
Can I live on my own? Um, if I'm really homesick, what does that mean? Do I can I push through, or do I need that support? I mean, there's so many questions that students are being faced with at that
Mhm.
stage of development.
Yeah, and honestly, that answer is great. It gave so much information that was both new, but then also includes all those things that I've seen, like, just within my peers around me while on campus, doing homework with friends, hanging out with friends, just doing things you kind of see it in those around you, and so I don't know if
And
validating is the right word, but it kind of is sort of like a validating answer, like, this is happening and,
yeah.
nobody's alone in it.
Well, and I think a really, like, very practical example of that is you put 3 people, 4 people, and have them live together and share a kitchen. You're gonna find out real quickly, like, who's what the family culture was about
Mm,
how you played a role in cleanup, who did the cleaning. When people talk to you about, hey, I'd really like you to clean up your dishes, how do you respond? What has conflict looked like in your home growing up? And so you put these 4 people together who are trying to figure this out and understand themselves and who they want to be together. And that's why you get, you know, them calling up, can I please get a new roommate? Because it's
mhm.
um, learning to navigate all of that. So that's like I think a really just vivid example of you get this culture clash.
Yeah, that's a great analogy because you actually have me sitting here now thinking about my past roommates and those experiences as well.
Yeah,
So that's a
it has.
amazing, way to think about it. Um, and I think towards the end, you kind of touched on this a little bit, and treatment definitely I don't think is the right word, but how where do you start with someone who comes in and has that, like, lower self-perception and doesn't seem to be yeah, just I don't know how to end that question, but
Yeah, maybe somebody who isn't well. So people are going to come in with an identified problem, right? And
Mhm,
so listening to what that problem is, if it's depression, I can't get out of bed, if it's anxiety, if it's my boyfriend broke up with me, I'm really missing home. Um, so there's like that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? That's the stuff
mhm,
that they're aware of that they're coming in with. And I know that there's all this other stuff underneath. However, because I want to listen well to them, I have to really hear, ask good questions to
mhm,
understand how are they thinking about themselves? How are they feeling about those thoughts? And what do those feelings and thoughts cause them to do about it? Right? And so I'm learning about them while also reflecting back to them what I hear. And this is kind of the little known secret about therapy, so much of therapy is just listening,
Mhm.
active listening, and then telling back to them, "Oh, I hear you saying this. Is that correct? I wanna make sure I have it correct. Your story is important to me." Right? So I'm communicating that, and then what the way I kinda think about it is together what we're doing is we're laying stuff out on a table to look at it. And then we can go, okay, so there's this thing, your relationship with your mom. There's like the breakup of the boyfriend. Why do I keep being drawn to these type of guys? We've got this, and so we're kind of setting things out, and then seeing what's kind of rising to the surface. By asking like, what feels most important to you to pick up today, or if therapy was helpful, how would your life be different? Um, and so, really, in partnership with the client. They know their life, and I have some education. Together, we can kind of go where they need us to go. What's working in their life? What's not working? Where are you stuck? Um, that's the biggest thing I see when people come in is they're stuck.
Mhm.
What they were doing in the past is no longer working, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's in relationship or whatever. When I tell people that it sounds like you're really stuck, I get this. Yeah, it's just not working anymore. Okay, it worked in the past. And so, can we talk about that for a minute? Why it worked? Well, it didn't really work. Okay, but you used it. Like that was survival, like to avoid conflict, let's say. Maybe you avoided conflict. Okay, well, can we talk about I mean, I trust that you chose that as a kid for a reason. Well, yeah, it was not really okay for me to disagree with my parents or um, whatever the case is. And as we explore that, we can listen non-judgmentally to what they have done, and then just be curious about, I wonder what it would look like for you to um, do it differently.
Mhm.
What would have to change? How would that be hard? How might that be helpful? And so it's a lot of listening, a lot of um, making some connections and checking in, like, oh, I wonder if what you're saying is that these two things might be connected in some way, and
Mhm.
going at the pace that they're aware of. If they're not aware of it, we back off, right? So
Mhm.
hope
Yeah.
that answers your question.
No, I did. That was great. And part of the reason why I asked that question is because there's so much to normalize when it comes to mental health and wellness. Not only talking about the topics, the things that are going on with people, but also normalize getting help and normalize that step of like, what happens once I decide I want to get help? Because I feel like that's one of the most unknown parts. Like,
Mhm.
yes, I realize now that I need to go talk to someone, but what happens when I step inside that room? And so I appreciate you sharing that with us because feel like it helps to kind of normalize, well, this is what you're gonna do. This is what it could look like. This is what's gonna be happening. So
Yeah, and I am listening for your story. I'm listening for who are the people that you grew up with. How do you feel about it? How do you think about
mhm,
it? What's your medical history? What's your mental health history? Um, and yeah, just and going at the pace, like I said, going at the pace that they are at. There's,
mhm,
people come in with resistance. They don't want to go here, but they're still coming. But they don't
mhm,
want to talk about this thing. Okay, I wonder if we could talk about why maybe you don't want to go there. Or what do you think might happen if we did talk about that thing?
mhm,
And so then we're not having to talk about the thing, but we can talk about what's some of the feelings or fears behind talking about that thing. And just respecting that people have um, defenses, they have walls. And
mhm,
I am, I've done this long enough to know they have a really good reason to have a protective barrier around that thing they don't want to talk about, or that thing
mhm,
they don't want to address. And so just being respectful of that and going at the pace that that they are comfortable with, but also at times reminding people that that the work see, how would I say this? I want to be careful as a therapist that I'm not working harder than my client, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm feeling like, oh, come on, let's go, and I have that like motivation, but they're not there, I need to back off because
Yeah.
they need to really own that something needs to change, and they just may not be ready for it to change, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I appreciate that phrase too at the very end, that that's okay. I just again, I keep using that word normalize, but that phrase, "That's okay," I feel like is something we all need to hear a lot of times, not just sometimes, but a lot of times. So
I mean,
so
well, I think that, again, going back to my spiritual beliefs, and I am
mhm,
not openly a Christian in the counseling room unless that's what someone comes in with, because I'm bound by the ethics of my licensure in mental health therapy in the state of Florida, and so I am not there to evangelize or to convince somebody of something, and yet I can meet someone where they're at, and so if they are a believer, we can talk about that. But I do fully believe that my faith informs how I do therapy. Um,
mhm,
I believe that all truth is God's truth, and so um, therefore, there is my faith is has a hand on everything. It is respectful of what people are coming in with. So all that to say, if someone isn't ready to face something or to talk about something, that's okay. I trust that, and I am often praying a lot in therapy for the Holy Spirit to be in the room, to be opening up um, the areas that need to be opened up, to be opening up my eyes to see what needs to be seen. But sometimes people just aren't ready, and that's okay. And I can trust that the Lord will hopefully, that He will, in His timing, um, help this person to face it if they can, right? So,
yeah. We've talked a lot about therapy support, but I'm curious, is there a way to offer peer support? Because a lot of times we can kind of see what's going on with those around us, and even if we can't, we kind of hope that someone might bring it up to us. And so, what can we do if that happens?
yes. So I actually took some notes on this because I think this is really great to be talking about this because not everybody is going to come in to my office or the office of a therapist. And I say yes and amen, like, because again, dignity is so tied to relationship.
Hmm.
Relationships with people can be so healing. I believe that they're designed to be healing. Now they're not always right, but the first thing is being open and honest with community, community that you trust. Like so, maybe that's the first thing is finding community that you trust,
Hmm.
people who you feel healthy being with them. Um, you feel like you have a voice, that you can speak, that you can be heard. So being open and honest, um, being willing to share about yourself, right? To
Hmm.
be vulnerable. Um, I think that peers can give each other unhurried time. So I think that's a big thing that I give, and obviously that's tied into I get paid to do that. But the reality is, we can all be listening to one another and listening to the information that we do get, and to be paying attention to, oh, you're really, you have a high conflict relationship with your brother. Tell me about that. What's that like? How are you guys doing now? Listening to one another and understanding that what this person is telling me stuff about them and their story. And that in turn is um, helpful. That what you communicate to your friend is, I have time for you. Your story matters to me.
Mhm.
Um, exploring resistance. Again, I do this professionally, but you can do this some with your friends, like even just noticing, oh, I noticed that when I talk to my friend about, you know, staying up late at night and dating a bunch of guys, like she really shuts down. I wonder why that is. And then maybe finding a time to go to ask her about it. Um, so, and having compassion, knowing that what they're sharing with you is a part of their story, that there's reason that they do what they do and resist the way that they resist. It's probably linked to survival growing up.
Mhm.
Um, peers can also be paying attention to how is my friend doing? Like, you know, sometimes I get this question from like campus ministers, when do I know when to refer someone to therapy? My answer, one of my answers is I think everybody could stand to have a person in their life that listens intentionally, right?
Mhm.
So finding a therapy, there's a lot of therapists out there that do listen intentionally. Excuse me. And and I think that that's really helpful to have somebody who, is professionally trained to listen and listen well. But the other things that I would say to really look out for when you're with your peers is exploring, okay, how much is this impacting their life? Are they starting to
Mhm.
miss classes? Are they dropping out of classes? Are they have they lost weight? Have they gained weight? Are they not sleeping? Are they drinking energy drinks 24/7? Like paying attention to how much is this thing impacting their life can be a really good marker for knowing whether or not someone needs help beyond peer support.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, those are the big things that I can think of that are
Mhm.
ways that peers can support one another.
Yeah, those are great, because that question is all about informing, and there's plenty of information there to kind of help someone take those next steps when they see something happening. So,
Mhm.
um, I guess I just kind of have one more question, and again, this question I'm not sure how to ask in relation to our topic today, so I'm gonna ask it, but try to figure out how we can interpret it, I guess. Um, how does someone cope with this? So say they have the realization and they are going to therapy, but outside of therapy, what do they do?
Yeah. Um, so how do they cope if they're having a hard time or if they
Um,
have low self-worth?
yeah, I would say like kind of tie it back to that self-perception and dignity conversation that we were having earlier.
Okay. So I the first thing I would say is really stay connected in relationships. I think it's really um, helpful to be connected with larger like organizations. So I think a church, being connected with church, if you have faith. Um, and there's multiple reasons for that. One, I think to remind yourself that this stage of life that you're in, which is so transitional, um, that there is life outside of all this transition, right? To
Mhm.
see families operating, to brush shoulders with people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who have lived life like, and so you get like this intergenerational perspective of there's life outside of my microcosm of college, which is high stress, high transition. And so I think being rooted with people outside of your um, college is really important. Um, I also think that it's really helpful to expect holidays to be difficult. Um, just having that expectation that I've gone away and I've changed. My family probably hasn't. They aren't experiencing all these changes. I'm starting to experience change. Like I've experienced change in college, but then if I'm in therapy, I'm really exploring how I can be different. And
Mhm.
going back to that clock that I talked about with all the gears, if one of those gears changes the rhythm or does something different, the rest of the clock is going to revolt. It's going to be like, what are you doing? You're supposed to move in this certain way. And families are like that. The family system, when someone changes, people aren't usually happy. You know, why are you doing things that way? Why are you not showing up when you said you would? Why? And so, and maybe this person is changing and it's healthy, but the system doesn't like change.
Mhm.
So expect holidays to be difficult. Um, you can be triggered, right? So you're working on these things in therapy, and then you go back home and you explode, and you're like, dang it, I wasn't going to do that. And it's like, the family is going to be the place that's hardest to bring change. So know
Mhm.
that you'll be triggered. And I would say also try, explore some of these changes with your friends. It's going to be easier with your friends. And then you can work your way into exploring like boundaries, setting boundaries, and these sorts of things with your family. Um, if you're really struggling, again, reach out for therapy, if they're not in therapy. Um, one of the things I wrote down was don't hide in shame. And that, again, that's
Mhm.
rooted to relationship. What shame needs to grow is it needs isolation and darkness. And so if you think about when you feel ashamed, what do? You like put your eyes down and you like pull away. And what that does is that creates disconnect in relationship. You're not making eye contact, you're not talking. And so there's like this cycle that happens when we're struggling and we're feeling shame, and then we're pulling away in relationship. And so don't pull away in shame. And that's why I say it's so important to be in relationship and to be pushing through and to be vulnerable. Because what shame wants is more isolation, more darkness, and more and more and more.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing that I think is important is taking care of your body, eating, sleeping, exercising. I feel like I sound like someone's grandma, but in this case, I think grandma knew best. Like she knows that this stage in her life, she's human. And I think sometimes for college kids, because they're still young, and I remember feeling this way, there's a certain like invincibility, or you know you kind of push those limits physically, and to remind yourself that you're human. Some people will be able to do all nighters for however long, and some people won't. And reminding yourself that you have limits and that you're human. And I think that also goes for like things like social media. Some people can engage on social media and they can have good boundaries with it, and then some people I talk with some people, and it's such a um, it's such a strong influence in their thought life. And
Mhm.
really accepting your limits, that maybe I can't engage with social media the way my friends can. It really impacts how I view myself and my life and my body image. So really paying attention to your limits.
Yeah. Well, thank you, for all of the information. I definitely think I understand more of this, because as I've said, I didn't know where to start with this topic. I just thought it'd be super fascinating, and informative to talk about. So thank you for that. And I want to thank what you guys didn't see is I want to thank her like 1,000 times because I also threw questions at her that I did not give her time to prepare for. So, and she was totally game for it and did amazing. So thank you for being here today. I'm
You're welcome.
excited
It's my
for this
pleasure.